Hello, my name's David D'Souza and I'm Membership Director at the CIPD. We're the professional body for HR and people development, and we champion better working lives. So I'm here to talk to you about the future of work, and that seems to fit very well with that notion of better work and working lives. But before I speak to you about that, and delighted to be part of the festival, I wanted to speak to you about my shark mug. This may seem an odd thing to want to focus on, but it was bought by a friend of mine recently because he knows I love sharks and he knows that I love the novelty of it. But when I try and drink from it, it's almost impossible to drink from without getting tea down my front. And too much of what we do in the world of work isn't necessarily shark related, but we value novelty and we value newness and we value excitement. And actually, we don't look at the basic problem that we're trying to solve. And at the heart of innovation is actually solving the problem that you set out to. And when we look at something as large as a concept as work, we need to be really clear on who we're solving that problem for. And that's been a problem historically. It's been a challenge in terms of political tension. And now we've reached this point where, in an unplanned way, everything's been thrown up in the air. And now we have to work out the best way of those pieces coming back down. And if there are things that haven't moved, we need to work out where they should move. And that's a massive, massive challenge. But if you went back 4 or 5 years, you would have found people like me running about on stage at conferences talking about the future of work. And broadly, those narratives split into two different spaces. On the one hand, you had a sort of utopian future, and that's where automation and technology allowed people to reduce the amount of transactional work they were doing, stop doing mundane work, and we'd be freed up to create, freed up to spend time with our families, freed up to have shorter working weeks. And on the other side, you had a dystopian future. And what that was this view of the world that large corporations would use technology to put people out of work quite rapidly, that society wouldn't be able to reset in time, and it'd have widespread unemployment and social division. What we've had for the last few years is probably not enough change in the world of work. We haven't seen shifts to either of those narratives. You want it to be the utopian one, but we haven't seen changes driven at the rate that lots of people would have expected or lots of people would have said. There's that wonderful line that we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and we underestimate it in the long term. Well, actually, the long term has been a long time coming in terms of what people have stated changes will be driven. We work in a very similar way to how we did 10 or 15 years ago. The iPhone is just over 10 years old. That should really, having almost all of the information available on the planet in your pocket, have been a transformative moment for the world of work. And yet productivity didn't shift hugely. And in fact, we've got a productivity problem specifically in the UK that still needs addressing. And part of that has been slow speed of technology adoption. Part of that has actually just been the way that we think about work and the way that it's constructed. So we now move to this period where everything's up for grabs, seemingly, and it's up for grabs for the worst possible reason. Because when people were talking about how quickly work would shift or change, normally wasn't going to be driven by a public health crisis. It was going to be driven by visionary CEOs or us recognizing the benefits of technology or a whole host of other things. But that actually is quite normal when you are honest about it. It's been driven by a large-scale economic event. We think about change in organizations being driven by executive teams or being driven by moments of brilliance from people within them. All too often, actually, they're driven by the needs that are created by the external environment. And we're certainly in that position now, possibly more so than ever before. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. As I said, service and humility. Service is a really important factor because if we don't know who we're solving for, we can't solve that problem effectively. And I know that part of the focus of this festival is on the generation that's to come through educationally at this time and will be entering the world of work when it has changed or when we're still shifting and adapting to it. And for years, we've had this narrative around how generations are wholly different. And that's probably an unhelpful narrative, but the situations that generations find them in, well, they are quite often quite different, and possibly with this group, never as radically different certainly within living memory, as it will be now. So when we think about who we serve, when we think about the organisations we're trying to shape and create, they are a key group of stakeholders that we need to factor for. In the same way that we need to think about the changing world for the people that we serve in terms of our customers or we have obligations to, who we serve next, our stewardship responsibilities, are incredibly important. And then the next thing is that concept of humility. And humility seems at odds in some ways with innovation. When we think of innovation, we think of boldness, we think of decisiveness, we think of people willing to take a risk. But at times what we do is we mix up that concept of confidence with humility. Humility and confidence aren't on a spectrum. You can be humble. You can recognize that what you're doing might be wrong. You can be open to failure. You can understand that actually you haven't learned everything that you need to, or in fact that things are unknowable. And at the moment, understanding that you just can't know everything and you can't process everything quickly enough is a key trait to have. But you can still be confident enough to take a risk. You can still be confident enough to say, look, I know that I can't guarantee an outcome, but we're going to have to try something, and we're going to have to find ways to learn, and we're going to have to find ways to discover. And if we can do that, if we can work out who we're going to serve, if we can work out what problems we're trying to solve for, and then we can be humble enough to try and puzzle our way through those problems without necessarily needing to say, I know the answer here. I know what must be done. I have a clear vision of where we must be. But if we can start working them out together, if we can start utilizing people's skills in a broader way and bringing people's voice and thoughts into the narrative in a broader way to solve these complex problems, then actually we've got a better chance of having work better for more people as we go forward. If we don't do that, if we don't show some agency, start making some decisions in a different way, then what you do is you go back and you revert to a relatively lazy default around how work should be done, around where work should be done, around what work should be producing and who for. So if we recognise we were wrong in the past, and we recognise that, albeit through tragic circumstances, we have an absolute opportunity to reshape some things in a pretty fundamental way, and we can understand that we need to, yes, keep the wheels on the bus, but we can change the direction slightly, or change the way we're thinking about the journey slightly, then this is an incredible period of opportunity. And we have the opportunity to innovate. We have the opportunity to experiment. We have the opportunity to think about potential rather than just think about crisis. And it can seem really difficult to do, and the world at the moment is overwhelming, and I wouldn't underestimate that. But the worst thing that we could do with a world in crisis is just be driven into decisions or driven into lazy thinking, rather than actually taking the opportunity to re-examine what matters and how we achieve it. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you have a splendid rest of the event and listen to some fantastic speakers, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.